Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us on Have You Heard, Armor Animal Health's video series. We have a number of special guests with us joining today to be talking about fly control and Pinkeye. My name is Sarah Griswold, and I have been with Armor Animal Health for 2 years, serving as the dairy marketing lead. I grew up on my family's hobby farm about 30 minutes west of Madison, Wisconsin. My siblings and I were active in 4-H, and I exhibited dairy, beef, and swine at fairs and shows across the state. With warmer weather on the rise, we need to begin our preparation for fly control season. This weekend, we reached over 80 degrees here in Wisconsin, but today it's a little rainier. Join us in the comments and share where you're located and what the weather is like in your area. Last week we had viewers from Mexico and Canada. So thank you all for joining us once again this week. It looks like today we have viewers joining us again from all over the country. So thanks for being here. We know your time is very valuable, so I want to go ahead and get started with today's topic. Today we have one of our professional services veterinarians, Dr. Vicky joining us. Dr. Vicky has been with Armor since 2013. She received her DVM from the University of Missouri, Columbia. Dr. Vicky, we're so excited to have you here today. Why don't you start by telling us a bit about yourself?
Hi, Sarah. Thank you so much for letting me come on today. So I live in central Wisconsin in Almond, which is the middle of nowhere. So I'm just going to apologize to all of you viewers ahead of time. My internet has been really glitchy lately, so if the video kind of stops, bear with us. We do have a few kind of workarounds, but yeah, please forgive me for that. I have a goat farm. I have registered Nubian dairy goats, which I milk by hand twice a day, every day. So I have 5-year-old twins. I am actually married to a farmer. My practice area includes a lot of central and parts of northern Wisconsin, as well as a few parts in Iowa. So thanks for letting me join today.
We're happy to have you here. Before we begin, I want to let our viewers know that if you have any questions throughout today's presentation, you can type them in the comments and we will be sure to get those answered at the end. Today, we are giving away an Armor Animal Health sweatshirt to one lucky winner with the best question. So feel free to ask any questions that come to mind as we go about the presentation. So let's begin. Although many of our viewers may already be familiar with why they should focus on fly control throughout the warm summer months, can you start by giving us a refresher on the importance of fly prevention?
Absolutely. So flies are actually a huge economic importance to the dairy and the beef industry. The biggest thing is they annoy cattle. And when cattle get annoyed, they have a tendency to run or bunch. When they're bunching or when they're otherwise expending energy besides eating, that's going to decrease their average daily gain. On the dairy side, if those cows aren't eating, then they're not going to be milking as much. So in the dairy industry, it's estimated that we lose about $1 billion due to decreased milk production every year because of flies. Some flies actually will either suck blood or they bite cattle and then drink the blood. So then there are losses because of blood loss as well. So that we see more on the beef side. Calves that are nursing off of cows that have a lot of flies will have a 12% decrease in their average daily gain, according to some sources, which can cost a producer $30 to $50 per head. So it's definitely something that we want to address now before the flies get to large numbers. But then another reason why we really want to control flies, the flies carry different diseases. They carry some viruses such as BLV, and recently there's evidence that they can carry BVD, which is bovine viral diarrhea virus. They will carry different bacteria, such as the bacteria that cause pinkeye, which I'm going to talk about later on during this segment, as well as mastitis. And then they can carry parasites as well. So there's an eyeworm, which is spread through flies. So yeah, lots of different reasons why we need to focus on fly control.
Those are some great reminders, Dr. Vicky. And at the beginning of today's live, we asked a poll question to see how many people had a fly control program implemented on their farm. And it looks like some people are beginning to answer that, and the majority of them do have a fly control program already implemented. So maybe they'll be able to take some tips away that you talk about today and adjust some things in their current program. Or some people that don't have a fly control program, maybe they can take some things back to their farm and get a program in place. So why don't you start by talking about some of the prevention mechanisms and ways to prevent against flies before they become too big of an issue.
I would love to talk more about that. So yeah, like Sarah said, prevention is going to be our best defense. And that's because once we start to see a lot of flies, we're actually behind the 8 ball, because those adult flies can lay 200 to 600 eggs during their short lifespan. So yeah, one little fly can quickly escalate into a whole lot more flies. So there are kind of 3 main things we try to focus on for preventing flies. We're going to try and make the environment less friendly to those flies. We can also use some different biological control measures and then different chemical controls. So for our environmental controls, most of that is going to be focused on manure management, because a lot of the flies need to actually grow, the larvae need to grow in that manure. So if we can remove the manure, we can decrease our fly numbers, simply because there's no manure there. One species of fly actually requires undisturbed piles of manure. So you'll hear, especially on the horse side, about their dragging pastures. And when they're dragging those pastures, they're actually breaking up those manure piles, so flies can't lay their eggs in there and develop into adults. Then also, flies like any sort of long grass, weeds, because those areas have a tendency to collect like straw, bedding, just various material. And those flies love those areas to lay their eggs, which then develop into more adults. So grass and the weeds cut short. If they're low-lying or damp areas, trying to dry those out as much as possible. And then uneaten feed too. That's a great place where flies like to lay their larvae. So making sure that you're cleaning up your mangers and removing that uneaten feed to a far distant place versus maybe even just piling it close to the barn. So any source, any place where there's any sort of organic material, we just try and get rid of that as much as possible to clean up the environment. Then for our biological control, there are what people call fly predators. So these are little species of parasitic wasps. And these little wasps actually go and they eat the larvae that's in manure. So they kind of act like an insect growth regulator, if some of you are familiar with that term, because those little wasps, they're eating the larvae, there are no adult flies that are going to go on and lay more eggs. So that's a great option, especially if you have a bedded pack, because those fly predators like to live in that bedded pack and they do their job there the best. So it's a great option, especially for organic farms too, because you're relying on a natural predator. It's not an invasive species. They will actually mail the fly predators right to your door, so it's another option. But then there's also chemical control. So that's more of our larvicides. So a larvicide is something that's going to kill the fly larvae directly. So some of these are added to either milk for the calves or feed for the cows, or both. Clarifly is kind of the most commonly used product. There's also Rabon, which is more for adult cattle. But what that's going to do, that Clarifly, those in larvicides, they're going to pass through the cow, through the calf as it eats that Clarifly. It's going to go into the manure, and it's just going to sit in the manure. Those products are very safe for the animals. It's not going to affect the animals at all. But when flies try to lay their eggs into the manure piles, they either can't lay their eggs in there, or the eggs can't develop further into adults. So again, you're just trying to decrease the number of adults. Now those larvicides, they won't kill any existing flies. So if you see a whole lot of flies buzzing around then a larvicide isn't going to be the best route. But one thing we also recommend is doing a more of a combined approach, often referred to as an integrated pest management. By doing that combined approach, say you're combining fly predators with another larvicide, as well as your good environmental control, you can get a lot better coverage, a lot better prevention of those flies.
Well, great. Those are some great prevention mechanisms that we can implement right away on our farms. But what if it's too late and we're already seeing a lot of flies on our farm and we didn't take those prevention measures? What can be done then to prevent flies from continuing to grow on our farms? What should we do?
Yep. So we already have a whole bunch of flies. There are kind of two approaches we're going to take. We want to try and treat those animals and then also treat the premise, because most of those larvae are going to be on the premise, but we want to make sure that the animals get treated as well so we don't have that fly worry. So for treating the animal, there are lots of different products out there. There are some sprays, there are dust, there are pour-ons, there are even ear tags. We see ear tags used especially on the beef side just because they're roaming on pasture. There's not really a central area where we can use some of the other products. And those are going to directly kill those adult flies. So they're adulticides versus larvicides, like I talked about before. My personal favorite sprays are Cactron 4 or the screwworm sprays. And that's simply because they last a full 7 days, a full week. So you can spray those animals, especially around the face, although not on the eyes. You can spray their back, you can spray their legs, and it's going to last for a week, which is great, especially for me as a veterinarian. If I'm doing some castration, I can just spray that site and not have to worry about flies getting in there. Now, for me personally, I told you I have dairy goats, so I use Ultra Boss on my goats. It is labeled for lactating goats as well as lactating cows. So it's very versatile. There's no milk withhold, and it's just a simple pour on that you do right down the back. You're going to get a couple weeks of fly control out of that, but then it also is great for lice as well. And then, like I said, you do want to treat the premises too. So there are a whole bunch of different sprays. You can do fly baits, you can do fly traps. A lot of people use the sticky tape, and those are simply going to, attract and hang on to the flies, or it's going to kind of keep the fly going to whatever premise. My personal favorite that I've seen really good success with on farms is Grenade. It has a longer residual activity, so you don't have to spray as often as some of the other products.
Great, thank you, Dr. Vicky. And I do want to let our viewers know that we do have a fly control tech bulletin. So if you are interested in reading up more on what Dr. Vicky talked about, please feel free to comment in the comments section if you would like a copy of that tech bulletin, or let us know on the survey that will be posted at the end of the presentation. Before we begin to talk about Pinkeye, I would like to introduce Dan Shoemaker, who is going to talk a little bit about some of the management practices that his farm does in New York to prevent against flies. Dan, take it away.
Yeah, I'm Dan Shoemaker. I'm one of three partners here on Shoemaker's Dairy. We're located in Naples, New York. We milk about milking and dry is 2,200 cows. We raise all of our own heifers here. The heifers included, it's about 4,500 to 4,600 head. We strive to be progressive, and we try to make it a good. We have almost 50 employees, so we try to make a good work environment for those guys where you can get work done, but you also have a lot of fun along the way. As far as fly control, fly season here runs from basically May till whenever the first frost is, which is typically end of September at the earliest, to can be into November. but I would say somewhere in October would be a normal year. We have two different fly programs, one for the calves, more on the calf side, and one for the cow side. On the cow end, we do use Clarify in the feed. That greatly helps reduce, maggots, basically, the hatch outs. And we do occasionally use we do occasionally use like a spray on pour on, but excuse me a second. Okay. Yep. Sorry for the interruption. We do use a pour on occasionally, but most of the time it's Clarify, and then we spray with grenade around the farmstead. We use a lot of grenade. We do that weekly during the peak of fly season. This time of the year, we started here in mid-May, and we'll do it once every 2 weeks to start out with. On the calf end of things, we have calf barns with individual stalls, and we use fly tape that will string from end to end of the barn above the calf stalls. That seems to be pretty effective. We also put a limifly in the milk. It mixes in with our pasteurized milk. And then we'll use quick bait. We'll cut off like Gatorade bottles and put quick bait out here and there where you have to keep it dry, but that's more or less what we do for the calves. I think a greater part of all that, all the different tools you use, along with spraying the grenade around the calf barns, we do try to keep any manure matter off the farm, whether it be spoilage out on the feed bunk or pack manure. Don't let things build up. Keep it moved off the farm to help reduce where the flies are going to go and lay the larvae, to reduce hatch outs. Also, keeping things weed eated and mowed, keeping the grass short, is something that we put a lot of effort into. Spraying Roundup around buildings, that kind of stuff. Not only does it make it look nice, but it helps deter the flies from hanging around and enjoying the habitat they live in, I guess. But yeah, that's the long and short of what we do for fly control.
Well, thank you for those insights, Dan, and thanks for taking the time to be with us today. I know you're very busy. I want to take a moment to remind our viewers that we will have a question and answer session at the end of today's live. So please continue to pop any questions you have in the comments, and we'll be awarding a sweatshirt for the best question. If you are watching the recorded version of this live presentation and you still have a question, feel free to post it in the comments, and we'll certainly get you an answer. Now, Dr. Vicky, if you could begin talking a little bit about Pinkeye and what causes Pinkeye.
Sure, and Pinkeye goes along with fly control very closely because unfortunately Pinkeye is often carried by flies. So Pinkeye in cows, we refer to it as infectious bovine keratoconjunctivitis. That's a big name for basically saying that there's infection of the eye. Usually it's either a bacteria or a virus, although technically it could be both. IBR is the most common virus we see. For the bacteria, Moraxella bovis used to be our main bacteria. There are lots of different strains of Moraxella bovis, which I'll mention later or in a little bit. But then there's some newer strains. There's Moraxella bovaculi, which that's been around for probably a good 5, 6, 7 years now. And then just in the last couple of years, here in Wisconsin and then out in New York, I know, we've been seeing some mycoplasma strains. So a Mycoplasma bovaculi and actually a Mycoplasma argemini. And based on those different strains, we've had to come up with some different strategies to try and prevent pink eye. What you'll see with pink eye first is that calves or cows will often just have a lot of tears. You'll see a lot of just tears running down the face, kind of running past the nose. After that, you'll see them kind of blinking a lot, might be more sensitive to light. And then as it develops, you can see some redness around the bottom of the eye. And then eventually the eye will turn blue or cloudy. And at the very, very end of the disease, actually as the eye is starting to heal, you can see just a pinpoint spot in the center of the eye. If pink eye gets severe enough though, it can actually rupture the eye and the calf will completely lose its eye. So that's one of the downsides of pink eye, is that it can cause permanent blindness. The other issue with pink eye is because those animals are not able to see as well. They don't eat as much feed, so then they're not going to produce as much milk if they're a dairy cow, or if they're a calf, they're not going to grow quite as well. On the beef side, there are estimates that pink eye costs the industry about $100 per animal. So that's a huge expense that we certainly don't want to incur. On the dairy side, it's estimated that it costs about $150 million per year because of decreased production. And unfortunately, if animals do go blind, especially on the beef side, if you have a really valuable beef bull, blindness is a disqualification on a breeding soundness exam, so he wouldn't bring as good of a price as he would if he was not blind. Pink eye is spread by flies. We used to think that was the only way it was spread, but especially with Moraxella bovaculi and now with the Mycoplasma strains, we are seeing it spread directly from animal to animal. Because we'll see pink eye outbreaks or pink eye spread through the winter when we typically don't see flies here in central Wisconsin. The other downside of pink eye, one thing that will kind of lead to pink eye is if there are scratches on the eye. Some of the bacteria need some sort of damage to the eye in order to get started. So if there's long weeds or really, really stemmy long grass out in the pastures, if the hay is really stemmy and sharp, or if the bedding is fine and it's really, really dusty, like a dusty, windy day, that can all predispose to pink eye because it's gonna, like I said, damage the surface of the eye and let that bacteria take hold.
Wow, yeah, it sounds like we definitely want to prevent against pink eye on our farms. So can you talk a little bit more about some of the prevention mechanisms that we can use, maybe some of the vaccines that are available to prevent against pink eye?
Absolutely. So one of our biggest preventions is that we do want to keep the grass, keep the weeds short, just to try and minimize any sort of irritants to the eye. If you're using kind of drier bedding, make sure you're not blowing it in so you're not increasing the dust. And then we're going to try and control flies using all the methods I talked about earlier. And then, yeah, a lot of times we do rely on a vaccine. Now, there are lots and lots of different pink eye vaccines out there. Every vaccine is going to have a certain number of strains of usually the Moraxella bovis in there. And the downside is that those strains are not cross-protective. So you need to have the exact strain that's in the bottle in order for that vaccine to work. So unfortunately, it is a lot of a guessing game. You could literally go and pull a bottle off the shelf and go, well, this might work, it might not. So some farms will just go ahead and try a vaccine and see if it works. And if it does, great. What I honestly recommend though is trying to find out what strains you have. So a veterinarian can actually swab the eye and then send it off to a lab. They can grow those strains. If those strains are in one of the commercial vaccines, great, you can use a commercial vaccine. If those strains are not in the commercial vaccine, like the Mycoplasma strains that we've been seeing, then an option is to use an autogenous vaccine. So an autogenous vaccine would be one that your vet clinic would make, or we at Armor Animal Health have made our own. And then clients are able to use that. So yeah, our autogenous Pinkeye vaccine works for most of the strains that we've seen in Wisconsin so far, as well as strains in New York and Pennsylvania, and then surrounding states like Michigan, Iowa. So it's a great option for farms where maybe they haven't had the best success with the commercial vaccines. Like I said, I highly recommend swabbing those eyes and finding out what strains you have.
Wonderful information, Dr. Vicky. I do want to mention that we have a pink eye prevention tech bulletin available. So if any of the viewers would like a copy of this, similar to the fly control tech bulletin, just let us know in the comments or on the survey that will be posted after the live today. I now want to take a moment to welcome Nick Heineman, who is a producer here in Wisconsin, and he's going to talk a little bit more about that autogenous vaccine that you mentioned, Dr. Vicky. So Nick, I'm going to turn it over to you.
This is Golden Sun Dairy. We milk 250 cows, and I farm with my mom, self, and I have two sisters that help milk. And we started using the vaccine last summer. Dr. Vicky said that our Pinkeye was a different strain and the spray wasn't working on them. So we used the vaccine on, I believe, 2-week-old calves all the way up until 12-month-olds. And after that, it cleared up the Pinkeye they were having. It would turn the eye white, and spray wasn't working, and we used the vaccine and cleared it up.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today. And if you're interested in learning more about that autogenous vaccine, feel free to reach out to us here at Armor, and we can certainly get you more information. I now want to take a look and see if we have any questions that have been coming in. It does look like we have a number of questions. So it looks like Lori is wondering if she can view this presentation. She's not able to join the live. So I do want to again reiterate, if you aren't able to watch live, that we will post the recorded version on our Facebook page and YouTube channel for you to view. Ashley has a question. She's wondering, does long grass irritate cattle's eyes and increase pink eye?
Hi, yeah, that's a great question. Yes, that long grass certainly does irritate the eye, especially if it scratches against the eye, and it will often lead to pink eye. So keeping those pastures, you don't need them super short, but making sure that there's nothing stemmy or rough that's going to be in contact with the cattle's eye as they're grazing.
Perfect. And Chelsea is wondering, what can be done to reduce flies for cattle that are in the pasture?
Yeah, great question again. So cattle that are in the pasture where maybe they're not as easy to catch, and we obviously don't have a premise to spray, you can still use Clarifly. They're actually like some tubs. Otherwise, the Raybon I know has some lick tubs. So those will help decrease further development of adult flies in the pasture. But then doing those ear tags, it's quick and easy to do an ear tag. Do that right at the beginning of fly season, ideally a couple weeks before you start seeing flies. And it's going to be an adulticide, an insecticide in those ear tags. And they work very well at minimizing flies in those cattle.
Perfect. It looks like we have another question coming in. What species of flies is the biggest problem in cattle?
Another good question. Horn flies are the species that tends to have the most economic loss, because those are what really annoy the cattle and get them running. So horn flies are our biggest species that affects the economy the most.
Okay, and you mentioned Clarifly some. One of the viewers is wondering if Clarifly is in milk replacer.
Yeah, another great question. So there are a lot of milk replacers that have Clarifly in them. You'll see them actually in most milk replacers. Otherwise, there is like a Clarifly ad pack that you can use, which is an option if you're feeding pasteurized milk, which of course pasteurized milk isn't going to have any sort of additives, but yeah, you can add the Clarifly and get the same protection as you would as from a milk replacer.
Perfect. It looks like somebody was wondering on the cost of Grenade and also wondering how often you spray it. So I'm guessing you probably don't know the cost right off the top of your head, but that viewer can certainly reach out to us and we can get you a price on that. But maybe why don't you talk a little bit about how often that product should be used?
Yep, so it will kind of depend on the farm. So some of the farms I work the closest with, they have sprayed the inside of the barn, right along the rafters, and they've had good control. They sprayed the feed bunks as well, and that they've done maybe every other week or so. But yeah, it has a very long residual activity. The one farm didn't use Grenade last year, and they had tons and tons of flies. It was almost unbearable being in the barn. I should say 2 years ago they did that. Last year they used Grenade, and there were almost no flies. So yeah, we've had very good success. And one thing I didn't mention, which I probably should have earlier, is that some flies are becoming resistant to some of our fly control products, especially the permethrins. So it is a good idea to kind of rotate your insecticide sprays, especially. Now, a trap, the sticky tape, they're not going to become resistant to that simply because you're physically trapping them. But yeah, some of the adulticides, it's a good idea to rotate those yearly.
Good, great information. Another question that came in was about the autogenous vaccine. So if you want to talk a little bit more, the question is, can Armor assist in the making of an autogenous vaccine for Pinkeye? So maybe just reiterate some of the things you talked about for the autogenous vaccine.
Yep, so all of us Armor create an autogenous vaccine for your farm. All we would do is animals that have Pinkeye, we ask that you not treat them with an antibiotic. And then we would come out, we would swab the eye. Ideally, we like to get 5 animals if possible so that we can get a good representative sample. We swab the eye, we send it to the lab. The lab then grows it, tells us what strains we have. Now, if those strains are in a vaccine that we have already made, like our autogenous vaccine, and you're working with one of the Armor vets, then we can go through the process of getting you set up to use that vaccine. Now, if it's a new strain that maybe isn't in our vaccine or any of the other vaccines, then we can help make a vaccine strictly for your farm. So yeah, very good question.
It looks like we have a couple more questions coming in. One of them is, do you see less frequency of Pinkeye in mechanical ventilation housing versus natural ventilation?
That's a good question. Yes. So a lot of flies, I mean, they're not strong flyers. So yes, if we have really, really fast, high-speed fans, or there's a good breeze going through that barn, we're not going to have the fly problems that we would in barns where there's not much airflow. So fans are another great way to decrease the fly worry. So I mean, most of my dairy farms, all the time, it's rare to actually see a fly in there.
Good. One more question has come in about rotating ear tags.
Okay.
Do you recommend rotating ear tags?
Yes, because of the issues that we've seen with some of the flies becoming resistant. So it is a good idea every year to try a different brand of ear tag. Now in a few years, you can go back to the original tag that you were using, but we just don't want those flies seeing the same ear tag over and over and over again.
Well, it looks like that is all the questions. So before we end, Dr. Vicky, do you just want to have a couple closing remarks or final tips as we enter into fly control season?
Yeah, definitely. So now is the time to start preventing flies. Like I said before, once we see a bunch of adults, it's harder to get on top of decreasing those fly numbers. So start doing those fly control management practices that I mentioned earlier. making sure there are no breeding grounds for the flies as much as possible. Using some different preventative measures, whether you do the fly predators. I highly recommend the Clarifly, like I said before, because you're going to decrease those adult fly numbers. And then by decreasing flies, we're hopefully going to minimize pinkeye as well. But now is the time where you should start looking at different pinkeye vaccines, seeing which one might work the best for your farm. Because once you start seeing pinkeye, usually it'll be an outbreak sort of thing where 20 to 30% of your heifers or steers are getting pinkeye. And that's very costly to treat. So trying to prevent it before it happens is going to be more cost effective in the long run.
Well, thank you again for being with us today, Dr. Vicky. And I also want to thank Dan and Nick for joining us and taking time out of your days. We hope you learned something useful today that can be applied on your operation right away. Please feel free to share this video with your friends. I also want to again mention that this video has been recorded and will be available to go back on our Facebook page or on the Armor Animal Health YouTube channel. If you are watching the recorded version and didn't get a question answered, feel free to type it in the comments and we'll reply with an answer. I want to now thank you for watching, and there will be a survey posted to help us better serve you in the future and get more information on what we can do for future lives. We will be selecting one winner for a $100 credit, so feel free to fill out that survey for a chance to win a $100 Armor Animal Health credit. Next week, to kick off June Dairy Month, we're going to be having a virtual farm tour. So we have a couple different farms lined up where you'll be able to see their milking facilities. So join us live then next Thursday at 3 o'clock Central Time on Have You Heard? And until then, we'll see you next time.